The Rosetta Stone has 3 scripts carved into it, but the one nobody talks about is the one in the middle. That middle band is Demotic, the everyday cursive that ran Egypt for nearly 1,000 years, written in a hand so fast, so tangled, and so abbreviated that even trained Egyptologists still can't read it at sight. It is the last and fastest stage of the evolution of hieratic and demotic scripts, and scribes reached for it constantly. Tax receipts, marriage contracts, private letters, spellbooks. And yet, of the 3 scripts on the stone, Demotic is the one modern scholars find the hardest to crack. Think of 2,000 years of accumulated shorthand, a cursive writing system where a single squiggle can stand for a whole word, and no 2 scribes wrote a sign the same way. That's the puzzle. This is the story of the Lost Egyptian Cursive, why reading it is less like translating a language and more like deciphering the world's oldest doctor's handwriting. By the time it died out, more than 1,000 years of Egyptian life had been logged in this hand. Tens of thousands of documents most people alive today could never open. It isn't a code with a key. It's a living scrawl that has to be learned, sign by sign, hand by hand. Here's why this matters. Monumental hieroglyphs get the fame, but they were never how Egyptians actually did business. The real record of daily life, who owed grain, who married whom, who sued a neighbor over a donkey, survives in Demotic. If you want the texture of ordinary Egyptian life under the last pharaohs, the Persians, the Ptolemies, and Rome, you need this Egyptian writing system. But it guards its secrets. Demotic emerged around 650 BCE in the Nile Delta, in the northern workshops of the Site 26th dynasty, the line of kings who ruled from 664 to 525 BCE and took their name from their capital at Sais, as an ultra-cursive descendant of the hieratic business hand used for centuries. By the time it matured, its signs had drifted so far from their hieroglyphic ancestors that you often can't reverse engineer them. Learning Demotic means memorizing hundreds of these worn-down groups almost as raw shapes, and the volume is staggering. Where monumental inscriptions mostly give you kings boasting, Demotic gives you everyone else: the widow, the priest, the tax farmer. The Greek historian Herodotus, visiting Egypt in the 5th century BCE, already noted that the Egyptians wrote in 2 distinct ways, one sacred, one for everyday use. Centuries later, around 200 CE, the Christian scholar Clement of Alexandria sharpened the picture, naming 3 Egyptian scripts: hieroglyphic, hieratic, and the everyday epistolographic hand we now call Demotic. That everyday one is our subject, and it is the pulse of ordinary Egypt. So what makes Demotic so brutal to read? Start with speed. Demotic is the endpoint of the evolution of hieratic and demotic scripts, the last, fastest stage of Egypt's cursive writing tradition, written right to left, first with a rush brush and later with a reed pen. To write quickly, scribes fused signs into ligatures, dropped internal detail, and reduced whole clusters to a flick of the wrist. A sign that once clearly pictured an owl or a mouth became an abstract stroke, a process that mirrors how hieratic itself had already worn down the original hieroglyphic forms over centuries before Demotic pushed that erosion even further. Worse, Demotic loves what scholars call group writing, fixed bundles of signs you have to recognize as a single unit, the way you read the word "the," without sounding out each letter. Miss the group, and the sentence dissolves back into scribbles. There's a second cruelty on top of the speed. Like all Egyptian writing, Demotic is a mixed system. Some signs stand for sounds, some for whole words, and some, called determinatives, are silent, doing nothing but hinting at which category a word belongs to. So a single racing Demotic group can bundle a sound sign, a word sign, and a silent classifier into one flowing shape. You're not decoding letters in a row, you're decoding decisions. The breakthrough came, famously, from the Rosetta Stone, now housed in the British Museum in London, where it has sat since 1802. Carved in 196 BCE, it repeats a single priestly decree, issued at Memphis in honor of the boy king Ptolemy V, in 3 scripts: hieroglyphic on top, Demotic in the middle, and Greek at the bottom. Most people credit the stone with cracking hieroglyphs, but Demotic came first. Before Jean-François Champollion announced his hieroglyphic breakthrough in 1822, a Swedish diplomat named Johann David Åkerblad, working alongside the French Orientalist Sylvestre de Sacy, used the Demotic band to pick out proper names and match them to Coptic, the last surviving descendant of the Egyptian language, still chanted in its Sahidic and Bohairic dialects, long after Demotic itself was forgotten. Thomas Young pushed further still. That dense middle register, the cursive script everyone overlooks, was the bridge into the whole system, not an afterthought. And it was hard-won. Åkerblad managed to read Demotic personal names as early as 1802, sketching a partial alphabet straight from the stone. But the full script resisted for decades longer. In 1855, the German Egyptologist Heinrich Brugsch produced the first real Demotic grammar, and later a 7-volume hieroglyphic Demotic dictionary, finally handing scholars a systematic way in, the difference between guessing at a scrawl and actually reading it. A century later, in 1954, the German scholar Volja Eriksson consolidated that tradition with his Demotisches Glossar, a comprehensive Demotic word list that established the direct scholarly lineage leading to the tools we have today. Now the doctor's handwriting problem. Unlike a printed sign list, Demotic was handwriting, and handwriting varies. A tax clerk in Thebes and a temple scribe in Memphis could write the same word in shapes that look almost unrelated. Individual quirks piled up. 2 full centuries could separate the neat early forms from the frantic late ones. There is no single Demotic alphabet to memorize and be done with. Reading it demands paleography, the patient study of how each hand, each period, each workshop actually formed its strokes. Scholars can spend a career learning to tell a Ptolemaic marriage contract from a Roman-era receipt at a glance. The very same shape can carry different values depending on the word it sits in, and generation after generation of scribes kept quietly reshaping their signs. A form that's crisp and open in an early Site period document has, by Roman times, been squeezed into something almost unrecognizable. That's why nobody learns Demotic in the abstract. You learn Demotic by period, by region, and sometimes almost by individual scribe, and that variation shows up vividly in the range of documents that survive. The Setne Kamwas cycle, a swashbuckling Demotic literary series featuring a prince hunting for a book of magical power, shows the cursive script at its most ambitious, handling complex narrative. Wisdom texts like Papyrus Insinger, a Ptolemaic collection of moral maxims that runs to over 500 lines, show it handling philosophical argument. And then, there are the mundane documents in their thousands. Ostraca from the Medinet Habu temple complex, where Oriental Institute excavations uncovered over 400 Demotic sherds. Papyri from collections like the Oxyrhynchus find that dramatically expanded the documentary record of the ancient world, and the schoolboy exercises copied on broken pottery at Deir el-Medina. All of it is in the same impossible cursive writing system, and all of it is slowly being read. This is where modern scholarship earns its keep. For decades, a team at the University of Chicago, led by the Egyptologist Janet Johnson, built the Chicago Demotic Dictionary, a monumental, free reference that pairs Demotic words with images of the actual sign forms drawn from real papyri and ostraca, the potsherds and limestone flakes scribes used as scrap paper. It isn't just definitions. It's a paleographic atlas, showing how a single word mutated across the centuries. And it stands as the direct heir to Brugsch's dictionary and Eriksson's glossar. Tools like this turn an impossible script into a merely very hard one. Slowly, receipts and contracts and love charms that sat unread for 2,000 years are speaking again, one resolved squiggle at a time. And the effort compounds. Every newly read text feeds the reference works, and every improved reference work makes the next a little easier. Huge databases like Trismegistos now index tens of thousands of these documents in one place. A cursive script that lone scholars once brute-forced sign by sign is now cracked, more and more, by a whole networked field working together. And that's the payoff hiding in the mess. Demotic isn't a failed or degenerate script, it's a triumph of efficiency. It's what writing looks like when a whole civilization needs to move fast. Contracts drawn up in an afternoon, taxes logged on a broken potsherd, a magician's spell jotted down between clients. The tangle that frustrates us is the fingerprint of a living, working bureaucracy, the final chapter in the long evolution of hieratic and demotic scripts. When the squiggles finally resolve into received from so-and-so in regnal year 12 for the price of, you aren't just translating Egyptian, you're eavesdropping on an ordinary Tuesday 22 centuries ago. The doctor's handwriting was never careless, it was fluent. And it stayed fluent to the very end. The last dated demotic text we possess is a graffito scratched by a priest named Esmet Akom on the Temple of Isis at Philae on December 12, 452 CE, as the old religion flickered out under Roman Egypt, more than 1100 years after the script was born. And that reframes everything. We judge old scripts by how beautiful or legible they look to us. Demotic flunks both tests, and yet it may be the most successful Egyptian writing system of all, because it did the one thing writing is actually for. It let ordinary people get real things done, quickly, in enormous numbers, for over 1,000 years. That fluency didn't come cheap. Behind every unreadable squiggle stood a scribe who trained for years to write that fast, bent over broken pottery in places like the workman's village of Deir el-Medina, copying the same lines until the shapes lived in his hand. Who were they and how were they made? In the schoolroom and in the temple house of life, the parank where sacred texts were composed, copied, and stored. Because none of that blistering fluency was a gift, it was drilled into them until the hand simply knew. That's exactly where we go next, in how ancient Egyptian scribes actually trained and worked.